Hello, welcome back. I'm delighted that you're all with us for this very special session with Lisa Su, the Chair and the CEO of Advanced Micro Devices, or AMD. If you're just joining us for the first time during the summit, I'm Mark Duggan, the Trioni Director of CEPR. I've been looking forward to this discussion Lisa and I are about to have for quite a while. The semiconductor industry has been front and center on so many fronts lately as it tries to meet the growing demands and navigate the supply chain hurdles caused by the pandemic. President Biden just called for an increase in US semiconductor production during his State of the Union address a couple days ago. And I know we're all interested in hearing from Lisa about that and related issues. There's a lot to cover here, so just let me give you a short introduction, tell you a bit about Lisa. And I can't do justice to all of her accomplishments. I could spend the full hour talking about that, but then we'll jump right into the conversation. Along with serving as the president and CEO and chair of AMD, Lisa also sits on the company's board of directors. Before leading the company, she was chief operating officer responsible for integrating AMD's business unit sales, global operations, and infrastructure enablement teams. She joined AMD about 10 years ago in January 2012 as senior vice president and general manager of global business units. Before joining AMD, she served as senior vice president and general manager of networking and multimedia at Freescale Semiconductor, a semiconductor manufacturing company. She also worked at IBM in various engineering and business leadership positions, and was also a member of the technical staff at Texas Instruments. Lisa earned her bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in electrical engineering from MIT. And we actually overlapped at MIT in electrical engineering for 4 years, 1988 through 6 years, 1988 through 1994. But she ended up beating me with 3 MIT EE degrees as opposed to my only having 2. But it is so delightful for me, for my world as an economist, to connect with my world as an electrical engineer. It's my first time ever, so I'm so excited. 2 years ago, she was named number 2 on Fortune's Business Person of the Year list and was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's received many, many, many awards, honors, and medals, and was appointed by President Biden to the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today. I really wish it were in person. But virtual is better than not virtual. But let's get started. We're going to start with some questions from me, and I want to encourage people who are in the audience to send in your questions for me. And I'm going to start out just going back to 30-ish years ago. So you've been working in the semiconductor industry now for almost 30 years, since graduating from MIT with your PhD in 1994, first at Texas Instruments, then IBM, Freescale, and finally at AMD. Maybe just high level, just telling us a little bit about your story, your arc. Can you tell us a little bit why you decided to pursue electrical engineering while you were at MIT? I did the same, as you know, a couple years behind you, and then continue on for graduate school.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Mark, it's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to speak to the folks here. A little bit about myself. Look, I was born in Taiwan. I was raised in New York. I came to the U.S. When I was 2. So my father came to the U.S. for graduate school and brought the family along. And my father was a mathematician, and so whole thing through high school and everything was math and science. That got me to MIT. And at MIT, you might remember, Mark, at that point in time, electrical engineering was the hot place to be, right? Everybody wanted to be an electrical engineer. It was considered hard. And so, it was, I don't want to say it was that random, but it was almost that random. It was just, interesting to be able to touch and feel things that you could build. And, my first year at MIT, I ended up in getting an undergraduate research job that happened to be in semiconductor devices. And so I was in a semiconductor device lab doing grunt work for a graduate student, making, I don't know, it must have been like $4 an hour or something. But it was a super fun because it was like the first time you were building something. I was building something, and that the rest is history, right? I've been in semiconductors, all through my graduate career, and then all through my professional career. And the thing that I enjoy the most about it, frankly, is that you are building something that I can, walk into Best Buy and say, hey, my products are in those things. Or, we can talk about some of the largest computers in the world and say, hey, my products are in those things. It's fun to know that what you're working on is actually translating to something that you can see, touch, and feel. So.
Well, great. It makes sense to me just hearing you talk about it, how you thrived and succeeded so well in this area. I will just say I participated in that same program, the UROP program at MIT, Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, and I worked in semiconductors, probably doing similar grunt work to you, but I got fired at the end of my semester because I was so unreliable and did a terrible job. So clearly, anyway, I don't think it was random. There was something to that, but I'm glad that it worked incredibly well for you. So, okay, so let's go next. While your answer to this question could clearly take up the full hour, maybe you can just talk briefly at a high level about how the semiconductor industry changed during the 25-year period from when you wrapped up at MIT in 1994 to 2019, just prior to the pandemic. So I'm going to ask you some questions about things are different now with the pandemic, but that's a 25-year period, 94 to 2019, both here in the US and globally. So there's a lot in that. So just maybe you can hit whatever you think are the key points.
Yeah, well, I think if you think about the semiconductor industry, what's been the driving force of the semiconductor industry, I think for the last, many, many years, including the last 30 or 40 years, it's been about this thing called Moore's law, and the idea that you can put more devices on a chip and it can do more things. And that was really driving the industry for the last 25, 30 years. In 1994, we were working on what we would call quarter micron technology. That was the state of the art technology at the time. And we were all saying that, hey, the end is near. Everyone was saying the end is near to semiconductor scaling. Life is going to get hard. The world's going to change. And what's been really amazing, I would say, over the last 25 years is, yes, the world has gotten hard. It's harder and harder to make the same advances that you were able to make a few decades ago. But engineers are incredibly, sort of capable and really creative and really innovative. And we've been able to continue this curve where you can get more performance per dollar, more capability in each semiconductor chip. And so when you look today in 2019, we're still saying it's hard, but we're putting like an incredible amount of horsepower on a single chip, right? What used to be a supercomputer 10 years ago is now like in your PlayStation. And that's kind of the power of the technology and all of the innovation. And I think that's continuing. Now, we're all innovating in different ways than we did a decade ago, but there's still a tremendous amount of innovation that's allowing us to have much more computing power in all types of devices and all types of applications.
Great, thank you so much for that. So we're hearing a lot about the sort of capabilities of, let's say, there's different parts of the industry. Obviously, there's manufacturing, there's R&D, there's marketing, and so forth. But can you just give us a little bit of a sense of how the U.S. semiconductor industry stacks up relative to other countries, including Korea, Japan, Europe, your where you were born, Taiwan, and so forth, in terms of the sales, the R&D, the efficiency of manufacturing, the location of manufacturing, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the U.S. is the leader in semiconductor design, and that has been the case for a long time. That continues to be the case. About half of semiconductor sales in the world come from the U.S. And when we say design, it's really the intellectual property for each of the chip designs, whether it's what's going into your PCs today, what's going into your data centers, what's going into your car, or your enterprise applications. I mean, the design is fundamentally, a lot of it is being done in the United States. When you look at it, and from a manufacturing standpoint, though, that has changed a lot. So from a manufacturing standpoint, we used to do more manufacturing in the United States, maybe up to a third of the manufacturing. And right now we're doing maybe about 10%. So you see a lot more manufacturing in Taiwan, in Korea, in other parts of the world, because it's become cheaper and more efficient to do manufacturing elsewhere. But the fundamental design and intellectual property, there's still a tremendous amount of leadership here in the United States. I will say that other countries have recognized this, right? I mean, it's a large, whether you're looking at Asia, China, Korea, other Japan, or you're looking at Europe, there's a recognition of the importance of leadership in technology. And so there's a lot of investment that's going on. And, we ourselves, from the United States standpoint, you hear a lot about it with all of the various government programs. I think there's also recognition that semiconductors are now essential. And for that reason, investment is needed, not just on company levels, but also on, government levels.
Yeah, consistent with that, as I mentioned earlier, not only did President Biden prominently mentioned semiconductors in his State of the Union, but Secretary Yellen just in our first keynote, you being our second keynote, just mentioned this as well. So we recently, a month and a half ago, I believe, had a fun event with Mary Barra, the CEO of GM. And I think, that industry is a little more straightforward to most listeners. It's sort of, you got GM, you got Chrysler, you got Ford, you got Toyota, you got some other foreign competitors. Obviously you have Tesla now. So there's that, but that landscape, but the semiconductor landscape is a little trickier. It's not quite as horizontal, so to speak. There's different companies, let's say, doing different things. So in addition to AMD, which has done spectacularly well, I should just say, under your leadership, I just want to say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because the company has really thrived clearly during your tenure as leader there. But in addition to AMD, there are several very large and profitable companies in this industry, including NVIDIA, TSMC, Samsung, AMSL, Broadcom, Intel, Qualcomm, and others. And which of these, that we're not have to be but which of these or other companies are sort of direct competitors to AMD, the way that, let's say, Ford or Toyota are to GM, or does it vary a lot just depending on which product we're looking at?
Yeah, so the way to think about the semiconductor industry is there are various, parts of the supply chain and various, things that you need to do to actually, end up with an end usage chip design. So AMD is what we would call a fabless design company. So we design for a living. That's our specialty, and we actually outsource our manufacturing to folks like TSMC and Samsung's a manufacturer, Global Foundries is a manufacturer, and that's actually a pretty popular business model. That business model became much more popular, I would say, over the last 15 years or so, just because, to get the economies of scale in manufacturing, it's actually nice to pool all of the manufacturer gets to really manufacture for many companies. So other fabless semiconductor companies are, NVIDIA. On the graphics side, they do, certainly high performance graphics. Broadcom is another fabless company. And so, we have Marvell, very similar, business model in terms of what we do. And then you have those folks that do manufacture. So TSMC manufactures for many people, Taiwan Semiconductor, very well known, a majority of leading edge technology, chip manufacturing is done with them. Intel designs and manufactures, Samsung designs and manufactures. Companies like ASML make the equipment. So again, that's another layer where they make the equipment for semiconductor manufacturing. So there are lots of pieces that are needed to fully execute the semiconductor supply chain. And we like to think that we're very clear about what we're best at, and we're very focused on the design portion of it.
Well, great. Thanks so much for that. So we're hearing lots, as you know, about chip shortages and the supply chain in the chip industry. And we're going to get to that in a question or two. But before we get to it, can you just give us a sense for what sectors of the economy account for the greatest chip demand? Because this is often not visible to consumers. For example, what fraction, not exact numbers, but just what are the sort of big areas? Desktop, laptop computers, communications, cars and trucks, medical devices, they're kind of all using them, but where's the big demand coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a $500 million industry, $500 billion industry. So it's big. And if you think about the largest applications, they really are around, computing and communications. So think about it as computing, whether you're talking about PCs, data centers, clouds, those kinds of things. You need computing capability. And so that's, one big segment. It's maybe about 30% of the market. And then communications, everything around mobile phones, base stations, all the infrastructure that's required to deliver communications. That's another big segment. That's probably about another, approximately 30%. And then you have things like, automotive and industrial and other applications that are actually far less in terms of the actual, chip usage, but it's increasing quite a bit. And so I think automotive is maybe around 10 or 12% or so, and it goes down from there. But the big ones are all computing, all communications, and then we have these other applications like cars are starting to become like computers, and so they're getting more and more semiconductor content going forward.
That's great. Thanks so much. And we actually heard a bunch about this yesterday as well. We had a panel on supply chain challenges and this topic. So what we're talking about right now has come up in a bunch of our previous sessions. Can you walk us through a bit the steps in the chip supply chain and how these were sort of functioning just a couple of years ago under more normal circumstances before the pandemic hit?
Yeah. So if you think about what you have to do in the chip supply chain, let's start first with folks like us do the design, and then we send it off to a contract manufacturer. Contract manufacturer has many steps to it. So there's a what we call a wafer level step. There's packaging. There's back end processing. There's all that stuff. So it takes. I mean, just to give you an idea, for very advanced semiconductors like what go into your PCs or data centers today, the most advanced technology nodes, it probably takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months to go through the manufacturing cycle. So it's a long cycle. There are many steps, very, very complicated, all that stuff. And then they go to a OEM that then assembles them and puts them into systems that you'll then see in either consumer or commercial applications. So those are the steps. I think that it's always been the way we've done semiconductors. What has changed is the fact that there's so many people in the supply chain. So that there's really no one who does end-to-end everything. There's lots and lots of pieces in between, and it requires just a tremendous amount of coordination to get it all right. People say you can have a $100,000 system that's held up by a $1 or $2 part. If you haven't planned your supply chain well, because there are just so many pieces to build a full system.
Thanks for those insights. So now I want to get a little bit into the current shortages, the supply chain challenges. And one thing we've seen data so far so this is our 6th session, I believe, of our summit, and we've seen some data about the surge in the demand for goods during this pandemic as GDP has been roaring back in the US and many other countries, and if anything, decline or certainly not bouncing back very much in services. And that has inevitably caused like a big increase in demand. But I know it's complicated, but can you give me a sense of your understanding of the factors most responsible for the current chip shortages and associated supply chain challenges? Is it primarily that surge in demand? Is it delays in shipping due to COVID disruptions, combined with the offshoring of most chip manufacturing, like this, this notion of becoming more efficient and going to the most efficient place for component A, component B, then if transportation gets snarled, right? Like, so anyway, maybe you can walk us through your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I would say, if you're really looking for root cause, root cause is fundamentally the demand absolutely exceeded anybody's expectations as the pandemic started. And I mean, just to give you a number, I think before the pandemic, the PC industry, which consumes a lot of semiconductors, shipped about 275 million units, which had been on a steady rate and pace. Maybe it's declined a little bit over the last few years. And come COVID, and that we took a step function increase in 2020 and 2021, so that we were talking about last year we shipped 350 million units in the PC market, which was like a record year. Nobody planned for that, and that's just one example. The same thing happened on the phone side. The same thing happened when you think about enterprises refreshing their data centers, and so there was just a step function increase in demand. And what happens there, then everything gets tight, and when everything gets tight, you start noticing things like logistics issues and trucking issues and sort of the piece parts issues. So it is one of those things where I can say that we can see this. The industries do go through these let's call it ups and downs as demand and supply are imbalanced. What's been different this time is every industry sort of had its best year ever at the same time. Like 10 years ago, you would have maybe mobile phones were hot, but PCs were not, and so the overall capacity in the industry could adjust. Whereas in the last 18 months, everything has become hot. And on top of that, the supply chain sophistication wasn't really there to really track every single component. So, for the automakers, I know there's been a lot of conversation about, sort of the shortage in autos. I think what happened is really the electronic content that was in cars actually increased quite a bit. But the supply chain sophistication of, figuring out how to make sure that you have resiliency in that just wasn't top of mind. And then this crisis hits, and all of a sudden we've all become supply chain experts, right? Every CEO out there has now become a supply chain expert because that's where we had to spend time. But I think that's fundamentally what it is. I mean, things like logistics and things like, COVID shutdowns, I mean, they did have an impact, but they were very temporal and much shorter in duration than just the overall, we need to build for this new normal. And, there's a tremendous amount of CapEx going into building for this new normal, which is a higher, demand environment.
That's great. And just consistent with that. And I just want to say, we're getting some good questions. Please feel free to send in your questions. I've got tons more for Lisa, but we want to hear from all of you as well. But like consistent with that, we heard some interesting data yesterday at our supply chains panel about the sort of just amount of volume of shipping of goods, let's say at ports, let's say in Southern California. It had been going up sort of 1-2% a year, and then overnight it went up like over 20%. And there just aren't warehouses, and so there's some of that sort of factoring in here too. But so as you think about this, would you say that you're optimistic or pessimistic that things are going to improve on this front in the upcoming few months or during the next 2 to 3 years?
Well, I am pretty optimistic that things will improve over the next, sort of 6 to 12 months. So somewhere in between. I think, we still have shortages today, but they're actually less than they were, a year ago. And I think that some of the CapEx I was talking about is coming online. New factories are coming online. That will help relieve some of the constraints. I think the demand environment also will somewhat adjust from, I wouldn't say it's going down, but it might temper a bit compared to where it's been over the last 12 or 18 months. So all of those things, tell me that it will get better. That being the case, though, I do believe that there is a new normal in terms of just the need for electronics in the world. And as a result, we will still have a period of adjustment to be made as individual sectors really figure out what the true, sort of sustainable demand is, going forward.
Great, thanks for that. So when we were at MIT together in the late 80s and early 90s, studying electrical engineering, as you remember, it was by far the biggest major. It was course 6, and double E and CS, computer science, were both course 6. EE was 6.1, as you remember. CS was 6.3. There were probably 4 or 5 times more, maybe even more than that, EE than CS majors then. And obviously, since that, well, I think we both know the opposite is now true, with about 4 to 5 times more CS than EE at MIT. And do you think that is partly because of the shift of so much manufacturing and the associated work overseas? Because, for example, recent data, you kind of alluded to this, suggests the share of the U.S. share of global manufacturing has fallen from about 37% in 1990 when we were both studying course 6, and now it's only about 10-12%.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a hardware person, so I'd rather have more hardware engineers and more hardware undergrads. For sure, I think there is a need for more hardware graduates, and that's something that is on the minds of, I think all of the top universities out there. I think the reasons for that are probably varied. Some of it is, as you said, some of it is the fact that there's less manufacturing that's done in the US versus, sort of 20 years ago. I think some of it is also the fact that, computer science is, a great profession. I mean, it's a great discipline that is needed across a broad set of industries. And, semiconductors and hardware tends to be a bit more specialized. One of the things that's kind of cool for me, though, is I would say that the last 24 months, semiconductors has been the talk of the town, and so that's good. I think we should take that particular moment in time and remind people of how important it is to actually build hardware and be able to build hardware and build products. So it is a long-term thing, though, that I think we all have to work on, is how to make sure that there's enough skilled workers to do what we want to do. And that's one of the things that as a semiconductor industry, we're talking about is how do we ensure that there's actually enough talent for all of the innovation and all of the engineering that's required.
So what you're telling me is that when I'm teaching hundreds of Stanford students Econ 1, if it's the case that they don't want to study economics, I should be encouraging them to go to EE. Okay, so government policy, this is a question here from the audience, and I'm just going to give a little background for it. Government policy decisions can, of course, influence the financial incentive that companies like AMD have to produce here or abroad. For example, the Chips for America Act that was enacted last year was an effort in that direction. Can you share with us a bit your understanding of that legislation, especially since we're SIEPR, Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, and whether it is likely to be important for AMD and others in the industry going forward, and just generally, what do you think is the best use of the funds being considered in that act?
Yeah, so we're very supportive of the CHIPS Act. It is a big step, for the U.S. government to take such an active role in an industry, and there are a couple purposes. But let's say, foundationally, what it's trying to do, it's a $52 billion or something like that. Foundationally, the vast majority of those funds are to try to equalize, sort of the infrastructure costs between building, a state-of-the-art semiconductor manufacturing facility in the U.S. versus building in Taiwan or Korea or China or elsewhere. And it's things like building incentives, tax incentives, things like that. That is going to be helpful to keep more manufacturing in the U.S. One of the things is that's not just about U.S. companies investing in the U.S. It's also about incenting foreign partners to invest in manufacturing in the U.S. So I think that's one piece of it. AMD doesn't directly, we're not vying for those funds in any particular way, but we're very supportive of that because it's great for the semiconductor industry to have a stronger U.S. presence. The other part of the CHIPS Act, which I think is also very beneficial, is on the design side. What we're looking at is, I grew up in sort of the era where a lot of research at universities was funded by either the government or by industry, and that's through graduate fellowships, that's through advanced research programs, and the U.S. has not ramped up our investment in advanced R&D the same way other governments have, and that investment is actually on the R&D side would be very helpful for university infrastructure, workforce development, ensuring that we're looking at the long range 5 to 10 years type plans versus, most companies are focused, like most of our focus, for example, is what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think both are part of the CHIPS Act. I think it's a great step forward. It won't necessarily solve, everything under the sun, but it's a huge step forward in just, staking that, semiconductor leadership is very important to the United States.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things we do a lot at SIEPR is try to understand the big picture on, let's say, all government spending and all government tax revenue. And one concern I think a lot of people in the SIEPR orbit have is the likely increased strain on, let's say, the federal budget as demographics change in the US. And that, the budgetary challenges, and will that inevitably squeeze the sorts of things that you're describing that are more investing for the future as opposed to consuming today. So it is, it's a topic that's near and dear to our heart here, just thinking about that right balance of how much the government should devote to investing in the future versus helping people today. And so, okay, so one of the, recently the Secretary of Commerce, the US Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, who was slated to be another one of our keynotes yesterday, but the Russia-Ukraine stuff required her to be pulled away. But she said a few weeks ago that it's really urgent for the US to pass something called the US Innovation and Competition Act. And she, based on her remarks, she said that the semiconductor supply chain is very fragile, and it is going to remain that way until we increase chip production. So can you talk with us a bit about your thoughts on this specific legislation? I recognize it hasn't been signed into law or anything, and it could still evolve, and whether it is likely to meaningfully increase domestic chip production.
Yeah. So certainly, again, we're supporters of, Secretary Raimondo has been just a huge advocate for the semiconductor industry, and we're very appreciative of the time she spends on this topic, since there are so many topics. And the USICA Act actually would be the funding source for the CHIPS Act, and so it's very very cohesive. And I think the answer is yes, it will help. No question, it will help. And again, this is back to just some of the as the economic policy says, it's just more expensive to build a manufacturing facility in the United States. And so without any equalization, the incentive to do so is not as high. And so it doesn't necessarily equalize things 100%, but it goes a long way. I think it will help in manufacturing, and as I said, I think it will help in development and advanced R&D as well. So I do think it will help. I do think, though, back to the point that you made earlier, Mark, public-private partnership is very important. I mean, I'm the first to say that, look, we as semiconductor companies are profitable. We're doing just fine. We also have to take a different view in terms of how we think about supply chain resilience and supply chain security. So that means that we don't necessarily just go to the lowest cost manufacturer, but we look at how do we balance the needs. And I would love to do more manufacturing in the United States, and I'm very clear that that would be a good thing. I don't think it's going to be 100%, but I think we can do more if there were more facilities that were built here. And so I think that's what we have to do. It's not all about the government. It's certainly about public-private partnership. It's certainly about building ecosystems around what we view as critical, essential technologies.
Great, thanks so much for that. So referring back to the State of the Union, one thing that was prominently mentioned by the president in it was Intel's recent decision. This is a question from an audience member, by the way. Intel's recent decision to build this big facility, let's say a 12 build. I don't remember all the details, but the big set of facilities in Ohio. And the question from the audience member said, Intel is investing tens of billions in new fabs. Seems like too much. These sizable investments have never seemed to have generated sustained shareholder returns. AMD has done really well with much smaller amounts of capital. Please comment. So this person knows what they're talking. So then you and this person know more than I do about the details.
Well, look, again, I think every company has their strategy, and so the strategy of building your own manufacturing and investing in your own manufacturing, I think that really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. For us, as I said, we've outsourced manufacturing. I think we believe that for advanced manufacturing, the idea of outsourcing manufacturing is it's more efficient. That's what we're best at. We're best at designing products. We're not best at manufacturing products. We partner with others, and we've been able to build very strong business as a result of it. But I think if you take a step back and just say, is it good that people are investing in the United States? I think the answer is yes. And now, of course, we also all have public shareholders, and so we have to make sure that you can get a good return on investment. And I would leave that to Pat. But I think the overall conversation is it's good to invest in the United States, and we encourage more investment in the United States from all partners, including some of the foreign foundries. Like, we want TSMC investing here, we want Samsung investing here. That's all goodness for our supply chain.
Great, thanks so much for that. And just related to TSMC, another question from the audience. There's this thing, China-Taiwan relations, and how do you sort of think about that risk assessment? Not getting to just, in this, it's a kind of a tense environment given TSMC, UMC, and others to the fabless model that is used by AMD.
Yeah, no question. I think if you look at the, overall geopolitical framework, it is what I would say is it's a very intertwined ecosystem. So, a vast majority of what we build and use here for, the U.S. industry, as well as U.S., sort of domestic usage, does have a lot of, foreign manufacturing. And that's something that we have to manage. And there are, in terms of just ensuring that we are very cognizant of that ecosystem. I think that's one of the reasons why manufacturing in the United States has been discussed as an important aspect. But it's a very intertwined ecosystem is the best thing that I can say. Whether you're looking across TSMC or you're looking across Samsung and Hynix on the DRAM side, or here in the United States with Micron, it's a very intertwined industry, and so I think we all know that it's kind of a shared interdependence. And that's what's managed. That's how we manage kind of the ecosystem. But that's what I would say. It's one of those places where everybody needs everybody else. And in some sense, that's a good thing.
Terrific. So I just want to once again point out that AMD has been an incredibly successful company during the past decade. And I checked I don't know if it surged by this amount the day you joined, but with its market cap increasing by a factor of 15 since you joined in January 2012. Can you share with us a bit why you think AMD has been so incredibly successful, and what have been the 2 or 3 of the most important decisions that have contributed to that success?
Well, I would go back to, why did I join AMD? I mean, I've been very lucky in my career. I've had an opportunity to work at some of the best, companies out in the industry. And I joined AMD because I believe that, high performance computing is important. And there are very few companies in the world that are at the bleeding edge of computing. And, we are one of those. I mean, Intel, NVIDIA, they're also there, but there are not many others in this area. And from that standpoint, I felt like, hey, this is a great market to be in. Now, what we had to work on is clarity of focus, clarity of strategy, clarity of execution. And, that's what we spent, really the last 10 years doing. I sort of kid to myself and to our team that, we shouldn't ever be confused about, what our priorities are and, what we wake up every day thinking about. And, we wake up every day thinking about great products and building great products. And how do we ensure that we enable our customers to do things that they couldn't do, by themselves. And so I think that value is, what we've been able to really ride and really bring technology that isn't available elsewhere, and I think we're happy with that. But I would also say that the technology industry, in particular, in semiconductors, it's about making big bets. So the products that we're bringing out, sort of today or in the last 12 or 18 months, I mean, we made those calls like 3 to 5 years ago. We decided fundamentally we were going to do things different because the world was changing and the needs of technology were changing. And so that's kind of the time cycle, which is very different with software companies where you can make a decision in 6 or 12 months, you'll see your products change. In semiconductors, it's like 3 to 5 years. And so to change a roadmap requires you got to sort of take a bet and make sure that you've made the right bets. And I think we've been fortunate that we've made some right bets.
Terrific, thanks. And I've got some more terrific questions coming in from the audience. Here's one. Can you talk a bit about what proportion of your workforce is based in the US? Intel, for example, has design work located in India and Israel and elsewhere. And maybe, also sort of to the extent, like what other countries does AMD have a decent footprint?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a fairly global company. I mean, we're probably now about 20,000 people, and I would say about half or so are in the U.S. We're also in Canada, so we have a large presence in Markham in Canada. We have a large presence in India, Bangalore, and Hyderabad. We have a good sized presence in China as well, in Shanghai and Beijing. We're in Malaysia, we're in Singapore. So, it's sort of back to what I said earlier, that these ecosystems are so intertwined. So it's helpful for us to have, design teams and, product teams that are, closer to our manufacturers, closer to our customers, closer to the end market. And that's what we do. But I will say that it has changed somewhat. So if you thought about things, sort of maybe even 5 years ago, there was a lot more conversation about, is there, labor arbitrage, or should we be looking for, let's call it more cost effective places, to build teams. And, today it's just all about where are we going to find the talent. And so we are hiring a lot in the US, but we're also hiring a lot across the world to ensure that we get, sort of the talent to execute the roadmaps that we're putting in front of us.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Lisa. And this may be, I don't know all the details of this, and if this is an area that doesn't fall into your sort of strike zone, no problem. But do you think stopping the NVIDIA ARM deal was a good idea, whether for competition reasons or for national security reasons?
Well, I don't think I'm necessarily gonna comment on that. But thanks for asking the question, happened? Mark. I mean,
can you educate us on what? So there was a proposed deal and it got shot down by regulators. Is that basically what?
Yeah. I think it's fair to say, look, large deals are hard to do. And I have to say, I feel very happy and proud of the fact that, we just completed an acquisition of, another US fabless semiconductor company, Xilinx, that's also, in the Silicon Valley area. And it took us 16 months, to complete our full regulatory approvals across the globe. And I understand, like large deals are not that easy to do. Now, I can say that there are tremendous synergies. I mean, we're super excited about what we can do as we, put AMD and Xilinx, sort of the combined company together. But it is a regulatory environment that requires, as a CEO, you have to think about that as you, go forward and ensure that, if you're going to try something that, we are able to complete it. So yes, there are, there's been a lot of semiconductor M&A to be, if you look over the last 10 years, there has been a lot of consolidation in the industry. And the reason for that is it's just expensive. I mean, it's very expensive to build the next generation product. I mean, it might cost us like $500 million to invest in the next generation, node. And, so for smaller companies, it's harder to invest at that, level and scale. And so a lot of consolidation has happened. But I do think the regulatory environment is such that one just needs to think about that in pursuing things.
Thanks so much. And yeah, this is a topic that, for those, I know some of Econ 1 students are tuned in, some of my Econ 1 students, and this just general idea, it's in kind of all industries, in healthcare, in retail, in manufacturing, in airlines, and so forth. This, this general question of regulation of these things, it's sort of out there. But in any case, thanks for those thoughts. So I want to pivot a little bit just because we had a session earlier today touching on something that we haven't really talked about at all, which was how workers and employers have responded to this pandemic. And obviously AMD is a big employer, as you just said, with locations in lots of places, with workers in lots of places. And let's sort of, how have you responded to the challenges created by the pandemic, for example, with respect to working remotely versus on-site, different regulations in different areas of business? I mean, we see even within the US, there's dramatically different regulations when you sometimes not only cross state lines, but even county lines, there's big differences. And so it just must be a very challenging thing as a leader. And you've got workers, some of whom want to work from home, others of whom want to be in the office, and then others hybrid. And so just, I'm curious to hear your thoughts as the leader of AMD.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think all of us as leaders, across any industry have had to become extremely agile. In other words, you never know what's exactly going to happen on any given day. And frankly, it's been amazing how well, our company basically, just turned on a dime, and we pivoted from, always in the office to, 90% of the people working from home. And, honestly, it's gone really well. I mean, the last couple of years, I think the productivity has held up. People have learned how to do things different ways, whether you're on the design side, we've learned how to do things different ways, whether you're on the finance side. I mean, my CFO said, the first time we had to close the books remotely, it was like, oh, I don't know about that, but it went, without a hitch. And now that's the way they do things all the time. So I think we've all adapted, and in a really good way. That being the case, we're ready for people to come back together in the office. I mean, there is, although there is this thought process that you really can work from anywhere, you really do lose something in the teamwork and the camaraderie and the culture and the creativity and the innovation. So we're not there yet. I mean, we're still mostly in a work from home mode, but we're very very hopeful that we can bring people back to the office in the not too distant future. And the world will be different. I think there'll be a lot more flexibility, right? People have learned how to work from home, and so it doesn't mean you have to be in every day and whatever 8-9 hours a day. But I think for real teamwork, it is important, and so we're looking forward to sort of adjusting to, again, the new better normal, post pandemic shortly.
Well, it sounds like you've expertly navigated this. I head up a much smaller organization. I found it somewhat challenging, but I'm incredibly grateful to and proud of everyone who works at CPRA who's adjusted really well too. One piece of we have broken out the ping pong tables more. So if you have ping pong tables, I encourage you to break those out to build camaraderie. That has been helpful. So I've got a question from an audience member. What is your view on the emergence of quantum computing? There's been significant recent venture funding, and it has major disruptive potential. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of interest in quantum computing. I think it is an interesting technology. Everyone's looking for what's next after silicon, and that's one of the options. I would say that it's still in the fairly advanced research phase. So there is still a lot of work to do before we can think about it as a high volume manufacturing solution. But yeah, there's a lot of effort, whether on the university research side or on some of the VC side, and it'll be interesting to see how it develops, over the next 5 years.
Terrific. So can you talk a little bit? So you've now been CEO for about 8 years?
Yeah, I think so. I have to think about it, but yes.
Right. Yeah, about 8 years, right? Time flies when you're having fun, or yeah. What have been your most challenging periods as the CEO, and what about the most rewarding periods?
Well, I think when we start on an adventure, you realize that there's a lot to do, and I would say as we started on this journey for AMD, there were a lot of people who wondered, frankly, could we do it? Could we? Are we big enough? Are we capable enough? Do we have the staying power for it? And so, the first few years was really about, building, sort of a plan and building, confidence in the team, and then, really confidence in, all of our stakeholders in terms of where we're going. I think the most rewarding stuff is actually, seeing our products in market and, seeing, doing things that you didn't believe possible. Like, one of the things I'm most excited about is a few years ago, we won a very competitive bid to build the first exaflop supercomputer in the United States, and it's called Frontier at Oak Ridge National Labs. It's right now deep in build. I'm getting updates about it, sort of every other day. It's sort of very rewarding to think that we're going to build something that there are no exaflop supercomputers in the world. We would like to be the first. And it's something that's important for our national leadership and our technology capability and our national labs. And so that's an example of what I would call a very rewarding thing. And there are many examples of that, right? Where I believe sort of the most fun is when you can really get a group and a team of people together and do something that they just didn't believe was possible. And that's what we try to do as we think about creating the future.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Lisa. And we're in the home stretch, so I encourage anyone who's got additional questions to send them in. I've got plenty to draw from, but I just want to shift to a slightly different area, which is only, as you probably know, only about 8% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women. And it seems likely, I didn't calculate this out, but that the percentage is even lower in your industry / adjacent ones. Can you speak a bit about whether and to what extent being a woman has affected your career since 1994?
Well, I will say that there's certainly not enough women in tech, no question. So I think when I was an MIT undergrad, maybe 30% of the electrical engineering department were women, and then as you went into graduate school, it dropped. And then as you went into industry, it dropped. And as you go up into senior management, it also drops. So there's definitely not enough. I will say for me personally, I've been, pretty fortunate throughout my career that I've always had very supportive, mentors and bosses and people who, sort of watched out for my career. But, the beauty of engineering, what I'd like to say is like, achievement is very black and white. And either the product works or the product doesn't work. And I think that's actually been very equalizing because it really is the idea that, my view of the world is, our job as leaders is to give, smart people great opportunities and see what they can do. And so I've had, some great opportunities and that's what I try to do for not just women, but, for all high potential folks that cross our paths is how do we, really challenge them and put something in front of them that they haven't done before and see how they can really grow through the process. So yeah, there are definitely not enough women. We're definitely thinking about how do we get more into the pipeline and give them more opportunities such that, they can, achieve what they want to achieve.
Terrific. Thanks for that, Lisa. And then, so another question from that is sort of in a similar vein. Can you talk a bit about warehouse scale computing? So this is a little bit out, but what you see there in terms of its potential.
Can you say it again? Which
warehouse scale computing? So basically, and this is not a topic that I have my finger on the pulse of. I'm drawing from an audience question. What do you think about warehouse scale computing?
I'm not exactly sure the term warehouse scale, but I mean, maybe you're talking about cloud computing as a possibility.
Perhaps, yeah, perhaps. Yeah, I'm trying to interpret what this person sent in. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about cloud computing as a trend, I mean, it's absolutely without a doubt a trend. I mean, more
exploded,
people,
right?
Yeah. More people are doing their work in the cloud than having, so the idea is, is it important for you to have your computing on premise, or can you leverage, sort of large scale computing farms in the cloud? And whether it's Amazon or Microsoft or Google or any of these guys, they're willing to build, huge football fields of computing. And for all of us, whether you're a big company or a small company, you can, buy a slice and use your computing. It's very, very flexible. So it's, there's been tremendous growth in the cloud, for that reason. There are still reasons. I mean, we have a hybrid environment, so we use both. There are still reasons why you might want to have your own in-house computing, security, flexibility, that's part of it. But cloud computing certainly has grown a lot in the last 10 years and will continue to grow, over the next 10.
Terrific. Thanks, Lisa. So we talked a little bit at the beginning about the sort of, I guess, decline, just straight out decline in the number of people who study electrical engineering and probably many other kinds of engineering over the last few decades. Do you think we as a nation should be doing more to increase the number of college students who study engineering so that we can do, just to increase basically this strategically important industry? And should we target those efforts differentially at women, given what we were just talking about, and or underrepresented minorities?
Yeah, I think the answer to all of that is yes. I think there is, a part of what, we are thinking about as an industry and also as, part of some of this, U.S. government investment. If you talk to Secretary Raimondo, this is one of the topics as well. It's about workforce development, and the workforce development includes how do we get more people into engineering? It includes how do we retrain and reskill, workers for engineering, tasks you can take from, let's call it more traditional factory workers and making them sort of, semiconductor manufacturing capable. There's a reskilling ability there. There is, conversation about, sort of looking at sort of K-12 and how do you get, STEM more prevalent and more interesting and exciting. And a lot of this is about exposure, right? So if I think about it, it's about, exposure and, even knowing that these are options for young kids growing up. And I think the other part that, we also think about is, how do we get our fair share of global talent, and, immigration and, high skilled immigration is also, part of that, all for the notion of, we want to be leaders in this area. We need a lot of skilled labor, and there are lots of ways that that you can incent that going forward.
Great, thanks for that. And we had a session earlier today with Sal Khan, the founder of Khan Academy, and Katrina Stevens from the Tech here in San Jose, talking about a lot of similar issues. So for those who are interested in this, please feel free to check that out as well. So a sort of two-part question from an attendee. So and by the way, we're getting this question, and then I'll have one more for you, and then we'll wrap up. Do you feel that materials technology for chips will keep improving at the same rate as in the past? And what do you think will be the key developments, innovations in chip design going forward?
Yeah, so I do believe that there's a tremendous amount of materials innovation. I said earlier that it's harder, which it is harder. It's more expensive, which it is more expensive. But we're a very creative bunch of people. So one of the most exciting innovations right now is chips for the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years have been two-dimensional. And so, they sit on a sort of a two-dimensional plane, but, we're starting to do three-dimensional stacking with, a lot of advanced packaging technologies for how do you mix and match things. And so there is a lot of innovation that's there that extends the ability to continue to improve performance and improve costs and those kinds of things. And I don't think there's an end in sight. I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of ideas out there. It's just about really culling through all of those ideas and coming up with the best ones to push the industry forward.
Wonderful, thank you for that. And this will be my final question, and then we'll wrap up. And I kind of don't want this session to end. It's so fun for me to have my two worlds, my engineering and economics worlds overlapping. But I guess we are at SIEPR, Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research. And I guess what I want to conclude with, and you just alluded to it a little bit in your answer to that question, what economic policy issues here in the US and in other countries are potentially most important for AMD? Is it tax policy? Is it immigration? Is it trade? And do you see any sort of low-hanging fruit out there that could strengthen our semiconductor industry while simultaneously getting better outcomes for consumers?
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, it's all of the above. So it's all of the things that you mentioned, and it's an integrated policy that we need. But when you think about it, we've talked about the CHIPS Act, we've talked about USICA. Those are great, very forward-looking programs for the semiconductor industry. We've talked about the need for a skilled workforce and ensuring that there's workforce development, sort of a high-skilled immigration policy that is friendly for us to attract talent. I'll also say that, from when we look at ourselves as an industry, I think, R&D is sort of the fuel of the industry. Most semiconductor companies invest, upwards of 20% of their revenue in R&D. So, things like, R&D tax credits and how those, really play out, all help to ensure that we're making the right investments. I mean, that's the key. There is no industry if they're not significant investments in the future. And, that's certainly, what we've been focused on. I think that's what we're doing at AMD. But I think more broadly, that's what we have to do for these advanced industries. Whether you're talking about semiconductors, or you're talking about healthcare, or you're talking about any of these industries that rely on technology to really move things forward.
Perfect. So I learned a ton, and I'm sure that our attendees here did too, our virtual attendees. So thank you so much again, Lisa, for being with us today. This has been really a tremendous conversation, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to join us at this year's SIEPR Economic Summit. And I do hope that we'll get to connect in person before too long. And now, for all who are watching, we're going to be back for our next session on the government response to the pandemic at 3:30. But first, our advisory board is going to convene in a special session, whilst some of our other SIEPR associates join an exclusive session with SIEPR senior fellows Catherine Shaw and Greg Roston. So we're trying to stay on time here today, and we've got another session more ahead. So hope to see all of you very soon, either in a couple minutes or in 32 minutes. And happy Friday, everyone. Hope to see you soon. And thank you again, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Mark. Great being here.